Iron Mountain by Rev Black Rage. So this might be the last story I tell you guys. But then again, that's what I thought about the last story. I told you guys about one of the worst days of my life, and it stirred up something in me that wanted to quit sharing with y'all. I also got tired of people questioning what I saw. But I'm over that, I guess, because I'm here, ready to tell y'all another tale. Now, you may or may not remember that I started writing these stories after reading about another Marine's experiences, some of which took place on a base in the Mojave Desert called 29 Palms, home of the infamous Lake Bendini swim team. This story takes place there as well. Before you ask, no, he isn't in this story. Despite having stood in some of the same spots, we've never once crossed paths. My time was a little bit before his. Sorry if that disappoints you. This story takes place on and around a small part of 29 Palms known as Iron Mountain. It's a pretty desolate spot, a training range out on the fringes of a base, where people rarely go. It's called Iron Mountain because there's a metric butt-ton of iron underneath that hill. Oh, it's also more of a big rocky hill than a mountain. The iron deposit makes receiving and transmitting radio traffic a bit of a chore. Sometimes you got comms, most of the time you don't. Something about the iron silencing the radio waves that silences badly for the radio waves, or some crap like that. We might have communication with the rest of the platoon, we might not. It was a toss-up. It didn't matter, though. We were out on our own for this training rotation, and by all rights, we shouldn't have needed to talk to them at all. But at the same time, you needed to talk to people if something went wrong. I should also mention that out here, we didn't even have comms with Bearmat, the boys and girls over at range control who could dispatch EMS or rescue services if something did go wrong. And there was a lot of somethings that could go wrong on this patch of the Mojave Desert. From going down due to heat, rattlesnake bites, ancient mine shafts left covered by old timbers, covered by a thin layer of sand, which were almost as dangerous as a landmine for the unlucky Marine or sailor who might walk his happy butt over it and take a 4-story tumble into a rocky heart of the desert. If no one knew who you were in that hole, and nobody knew where you were looking at dying. Dying in the dark. Nice and slow like, that is, of course, if you even survived the fall. The section of OVs I was assigned to had been tasked out with supporting a company of infantry. Learning them up on how to work with our vehicles, we'd be running each platoon through some training lanes, making sure they knew how to not be crushed by an Amtrak, how to dismount the vehicle without shooting each other in the back, incorporate our heavy guns into their defense or offense, and, most importantly, to not touch anything painted red. Touching anything that was painted red is the worst thing a grunt can do at any given time while in an AAVP 7A1. Aside from vomiting, of course, which grunts do with a startling frequency. Grunts are such babies when they have to ride in tracks. Oh sure, they like to talk big, but you cram 30 of them into a little box designed to hold about 12, fill that box with diesel exhaust, heat it to 120 degrees, have a massive, unmuffled engine screaming at them from a foot away. Oh yeah, and turn the lights out. You'll see a grown man cry. That aside, training grunts can be a pain in the butt, depending on the unit you're working with. Some units are good to train and work with, and some could be a nightmare. The infantry company we were supposed to be working with was from 1st Battalion, 3rd Marines out of Hawaii, also known as the Lava Dogs. They had a bit of a reputation for being hard to work with, which is a nice way of saying that as an organization they sucked at life. But concerns with our training partners aside, the day's training never came to fruition. We were supposed to meet up with them out on Iron Mountain. However, when we rolled up to said named mountain, well, Iron Mountain was there, but that was about it. None of the grunts who were supposed to be out here ready and eager to train. Our section leader, the sergeant who went by the handle Dingo on account of him being originally from Australia, had us pull our tractors up to the plateau of the hill, a place that gave a commanding view of the valleys around us and the actual mountains off in the distance. We could see all the way down to the town of Amboy, which was about 17 miles to the north of us across a massive salt flat. No grunts for as far as the eye could see, though. Well, don't that beat all? Looked like the lava dogs were lava lost. I had my driver kill the engine and lower the back ramp of his vehicle. As I walked out of the tractor, I told my crew to look the pig over for damage or oil leaks. My dungeon monkey, kid who went by the name of Hippie, raised his hand, which was a bit silly since there was only 2 of us standing in the back of the tractor. But in most respects, he was a little bit of a silly guy. I nodded at him to proceed with his request for knowledge. "Corporal?" he asked. Every ounce of the stoner he was in civilian life, and probably on every extended leave block he took, bled out of his voice. I didn't really hold him in bad regard for it, the pot smoking that is. As long as it didn't affect what he did in my time, I was full of don't give a crap on the subject. After all, he was a good kid, just a bit slow. But I will say he must have been a damn magician when it came to dodging peeing hot on a random drug test, though. He had to be. My lack of give a crap on the subject in no way translated towards the Marine Corps' opinion on the matter. If he pissed hot, I'm agreeing would tear his balls off and send him home with a big chicken dinner. Or bad conduct discharge, for those of you not in the know. Where's the grunt side? That's a great goddamn question, Hippie, I said. And I aim to find that out just as soon as I can. We got briefed that they would be waiting for us and ready to train. I motioned out at the empty desert valley around us. I paused for comedic effect. But I think the lava dogs got lava lost. I paused waiting for that stoner chuckle of his to slip out. It never came, though. He just stared blankly at me for a moment before nodding awkwardly. "Yeah, I guess they did, Corporal," he said with zero trace of humor in his voice. Not even a fake chuckle for butt-kissing's sake. My pride took a hit, as my comedic genius went unappreciated. "Anyway," I said, trying to recover from a joke that had fallen flat on its butt, "that ain't your immediate goddamn concern now, is it?" "Nah, Corporal," he said. "I gotta make sure that Goot didn't drive over any comm wire and screw up our crap." "Attaboy, Hippie," I said as he wandered off. I looked over at Dingo's tractor and saw his crew out and about, going over their vehicle as well. He was standing on top of his tractor with his flak jacket off and his CVC helmet on. He was holding the transmit button on the earmuff of the helmet and staring off into the distance. Looked like he was trying to get into touch with someone, which would have been long odds given our current locality. I walked over to his vehicle, lighting up the smoke as I went. I used the ladder on the driver's side to climb up and on top of the tractor. I stood next to the sergeant as he tried in vain to make contact with somebody from either our platoon or the lava dogs, listening to one side of the conversation with the ether. I let my eyes wander across our surrounding environs. It was starting to get chilly as winter was creeping up on us, and the first snows covered the caps of the mountains in the distance. It really was a beautiful place, given the desolate and off in the middle of nowhere locality of 29 Palms. It should come as no surprise that the place has a reputation for being something of a crap hole amongst Marines. A crap hole with nothing to do. Which may be valid for most 20-something Marines, but me? I liked 2-9. It was quiet, and I like quiet places. You could stand at any given point and stare out across the land for miles and see some of the prettiest country on the planet. If desolate deserts were your thing, that is. Yes, the Mojave can be a beautiful place, However, it was also the sort of place that would kill you if you didn't respect it. From Marines falling into abandoned mine shafts, the rattlesnakes letting you know that you didn't really belong out here, all the way up to plain old human error. This place killed people every year. It made the safety briefs ridiculously long as all hell. On top of that, there's plenty of weird stuff out here, of other than normal nature. Lights in the desert sky, phantoms in the desert, hillbilly meth-head scrapers who made a family from the Hills of Eyes look like well-adjusted people, and of course the infamously terrifying Desert Yeti snatching up junior Marines and stealing their souls, as well as their ba. All sorts of ooky spooky crap that nobody could explain. Nothing I felt I couldn't handle, though. Nothing that could compare to my experiences with weird crap thus far in the Marine Corps. I was still kind of a dumbass at that point. But all the bull crap aside, I could still appreciate the beauty of the few wild places left, and 29 Palms was one of them. "Roger that, guide of mine." Dingo's voice brought me back to reality. He had apparently gotten comms with somebody back at the platoon. "We'll sit tight and wait for the grunts. Any idea when they'll be making themselves present?" I had a pretty good idea what Dingo would be hearing on the other end of that conversation. "Roger that, guide of mine. No impact, no idea. Dingo out." He pulled his CVC helmet off and looked over at me. "Well, the numpty fools are looking like no-shows today," he said, pulling a can of Cope Longcut out of his shoulder pocket. He held out the can to me, but I waved it off. That crap was gross. "What does that mean for us, boss?" I said, taking a drag from my cigarette. "I reckon it means break out the hip pocket classes and the MRAs," Dingo said as he packed a fist-sized wad of dip in his lip. "We're gonna be thumping our sex for a while. We're gonna have chow and water to gut for a while, but if they don't show up tomorrow, we're RTB back to main side. Let's set up radio watch on my loudspeaker, and I guess we'll live the suck for now." "Roger that, Sarn." We spent our day doing typical Marine Corps things. Hip pocket classes, bull crapping, eating MREs, throwing rocks at stuff and each other, setting crap on fire, making the boots fight each other. Normal time killer things. As the night stretched out across the desert and the temperature started to drop, we half expected to see the Humvees and 7-tons lighting up the desert with headlights blazing a path towards Iron Mountain. It would have been just our luck. They would have pulled their crap together and gotten to the range just in time to turn this tramp into a night op. They never came, though. We were settled down around a fire when Dingo leaned back and motioned for everyone to shut the heck up. "Anyone else hear that?" he asked the Marines gathered around the fire. "I think I did, Sart." My driver, a private first class we'd like to call the Goot, said. He was of Puerto Rican extraction, and his accent boiled over into his English. "It sounded like a gunshot, but like really far away. Didn't hear where it came from." "Yeah," Dingo acknowledged as he stood up from the fire. He moved toward one of the tracks and climbed up the side so he could get a better vantage point of our surrounding environs. I followed him, wanting to see if I could see where it was coming from too. We didn't feel particularly threatened, as this was a training base primarily, so there was usually a lot of unidentified gunfire off in the distance. That was the nature of a place where people shot things. But something about a single gunshot off in the distance had Dingo curious, and I recall thinking that the singular shot floating off in the chilly night breeze did seem a touch ominous at the time. A thought occurred to me, though. We were off on the fringes of the base, damn near off the invisible boundaries of the damn thing. Dingo was looking inward towards the base, from his vantage point up on top of the hog. "Yo, Dingo," I called up to him. "Oi," floated back down to me in the chilly night air. "You think it might be coming from Amboy?" I could imagine the stocky Australian turning and looking across the salt flats towards the lights of the tourist trap in the distance. I reckon it might be. He called back down to me. The rest of the evening went by with no signs of the grunts, nor any more peculiar signs of gunshots. We set up a fire watch, 2 Marines who would rove the area around the vehicles, keeping an eye out for anything that could be a danger to the sleeping Marines. They carried rifles. They didn't have ammo, though, so the best they could do is make a lot of noise and wake everyone up. I lost a bet with Dingo. Since he's still in the Marine Corps, for legal purposes the nature of the bet will go unmentioned. For other legal purposes, that was a joke. That had nothing to do with making our drivers fight each other. But since I lost this pretend bet, thanks, Goot, glass-jawed son of a gun, that never happened. I had to stand the balls to forewatch. My phone alarm went off about 15 minutes to midnight. I came awake to Ben E. King imploring me to allay his fears by standing next to him. I grabbed for my phone and managed to turn the musical alarm off. Around the same time, Ben was promised me that he wouldn't cry. I heard no movement from the snoring form of hippie across from me, nor from Goot sleeping up at the driver's station. I briefly considered dropping my chevrons on one of them and making them stand my watch. It was an attractive yet fleeting thought. I just wasn't that much of a wiener. I had NCOs who pulled crap like that when I was a junior Marine, and I really did not want to emulate the wieners I'd grown to despise. I sat up out of my sleeping bag, and the cold hit me right in the nuts. The kind of cold you get in the desert at night that goes straight to your bones. It's a miserable damn thing when you're just wearing PT gear. Jesus goddamn Christ! I grunted as I reached for my uniform, hoping my snivel gear would hold off the chill. 5 minutes later, I was standing at the back of my vehicle trying to warm up. The back crewman of the Dingo's track swung open, and Doc Wrinkles slid out. He was a perpetually cheery person and an honestly nice guy. He was also the only naval corpsman I had ever met who voluntarily stood fire watch. Good dude. "Morning, bud," he said with that irritatingly perpetual cheerfulness. "Screw you, Doc," I said grumpily, trying to suck every ounce of heat out of the Marlboro cigarette I could. "Oh, come on, big guy," he said with a laugh. "It's a lovely evening, and I couldn't think of anyone else I'd rather spend it with." "Bro, did you bump some meth before you hopped out that tractor?" I said, rubbing my eyes. "'Cause you must be high." "High on life, brother," he shot back. "Yeah, anyway," I said, changing the subject. "Since you were late for post-relief, I sent them to bed. They heard a few more gunshots. Sounded like they were coming from Amboy. Nothing crazy, but Dingo broke out the safety rounds, just to be sure. Now, safety rounds are usually a magazine or two of 5.56 for the M4 carbine, or a magazine of 9mm rounds for the old M9 pistol that Dingo carried. They're usually meant for animals. But out here at 29 Palms, with its meth-head scrapper infestation, they tended to be for bipedal problems as well. I tapped the magazine sitting in the magwell of my rifle. It made the restrained rattling sound that a compressed mag spring breaks when it has 29 rounds of M855 government-issue green tips sitting in it. Doc got a thoughtful look on his face. "Well, let's hope we don't have to wake everyone up with gunfire, because I'm so in love with being a bored corpsman." His tone growed somber. "A bored corpsman is a happy corpsman. So, try not to shoot anyone." "I'll do my best," I told Doc. I held out the second mag of safety rounds to him. He stared at it briefly and shook his head in the negative. "I'm straight," he said by way of dismissal. I knew that Doc wasn't looking forward to deploying to a combat zone, not out of cowardice. He had joined the Navy to become a corpsman like his dad. Fix people, not screw 'em up. It was something he would have to make peace with if he ever did end up deploying. He wasn't a man of violence. Hell of a career choice for a pacifist. I shrugged my shoulders and shoved the magazine into my cargo pocket. I wasn't going to try and make a federal case out of it. We weren't anywhere close to being in the crap. So what did it matter out here? I just pulled my cap down around my ears and said, fair enough. About an hour later, we were walking our post in a military manner, keeping always on the alert and observing anything that takes place within sight or hearing. And in the middle of the desert, at balls o'clock in the morning, that meant not a whole heckin' lot. So we were actually sitting on a couple of particularly large rocks, freezing our balls off and shooting the crap. A small fire burning between our respective rocks. So anyway, Goku has his kid, but it's not like he even cares about him, just fighting. So the internet says Piccolo's his actual dad. Kinda like, Doc, I don't know what the heck you're talking about, I finally said, interrupting his rambling about some cartoon he liked. You want to talk about guns, fat chicks, or beer? And I'm your guy. But I don't even know how to respond to half the crap you just said. Doc looked over at me in the dark, big grin on his face. You uncultured swine, he said with a chuckle. Correct, I affirmed, taking a drag of my cigarette and looking up at the stars. One good thing about the desert, without all the light pollution, you got a real good look at the cosmos. I brought my gaze back down toward him. But also, screw you. Merle Haggard and Johnny Cash are culture, and you don't know damn about them. He laughed at that. Doc wasn't a big country music fan. That's true, I don't, he went on. But I also don't know what the inside of my sister feels like. Oh, I do, I said back. Now, normally I don't talk crap on family, but he left that door wide open, and there was no way in hell I wasn't going to walk out through it. When's she coming around to visit again? Asking for a bunch of friends. You had sex with a black girl, Doc said, rolling the verbal punch and winding up his own. Don't you hillbillies execute each other over stuff like that in Texas? Either way, it's good to hear you're stepping out the family treehouse. I ain't from damn Vidor, butthole, I responded, digging deep in the bag of witty retort and finding none at the ready. I doubted he even knew about Vidor, Texas. We Texans aren't exactly proud of the place, and we don't normally discuss that crap hole in polite company. So the weak response probably meant precisely jack crap to him. I was about to change the subject when Doc changed it for me. Not verbally. He sat up on his rock, going stiff for a moment. He stared out towards the salt flats of our north. Amboy just beyond. I could just make out a couple of lights from the town in the distance. I scanned the desert, trying to find what he was looking for. I couldn't see anything. What? I asked, standing up and doing brass checks on my rifle, force of habit. He didn't immediately reply. He stood up from his rock, giving himself more of a commanding view. He reached into the green canvas bag on his belt, pulling out his night vision monocular. I kicked out our little campfire, in case it was range control sneaking up on us in the dark. Those guys really hate it when you set their desert on fire. He held the monocular up to his right eye, a green circle of light illuminating his peeper. He squinted. I think I see something, he said. Way the hell out there. The PVS-14 night vision monocular has a visual range of about 300 meters. Past that, it all sort of blends together in a grainy shade of green. What you see? I asked, bringing up my M4 to my shoulder and scanning the desert in the direction Doc was looking. Thought I saw something moving out there, Doc said, a bit of fear in his voice. Now, I don't know if it was the wind that was starting to kick up, something else sending a chill up my spine. but I involuntarily shuddered and reached down to pull the gator neck up over my face. The cold air, damn near an omen of things to come. Doc shivered too, but he never took his eye off the NVG. He merely scanned in broader strokes. "There's someone out there," he said cryptically. I sighed out loud. I reached up and rubbed my eyes, giving my head a minor shake. I knew there was some stupid crap out here in the desert. I don't know if you read my other stories, but this crap seems drawn to me. Even now, after I got out of the Marine Corps, weird crap seems to cross my path from time to time. Someone once told me that weird crap happens to everyone. Most people just write it off as something else and go on about their day. Or they have a spooky story to tell people that gets a chuckle, and that's the end of their life amongst paranormal bullcrap. Apparently, my damn problem is that I'm just super lucky. The crap I've seen was just a little more in your face and undeniable. Most of it was crap you shared with your therapist, not over drinks with a stripper at Toby's Gentlemen's Club any given Tuesday morning. And don't get me wrong, the girls at Toby's are supportive as hell, but most of them are pursuing degrees outside of parapsychology and are of little help when it comes to my particular set of issues. I could have gotten help while I was at the Marine Corps, but anyone will tell you a trip to see the head shrinker could be a career ender, or worse. I had a buddy that said he heard voices calling his name in the dead of night. He went to the wizard, or naval psychologist. The wizard told him point blank that he was making it up for attention. Never even asked him about his time overseas. About being stuck in a burning Amtrak. About listening to his buddies scream for help as they burned alive. About being pulled to safety. About how his first instinct was to get back into the tractor, because he felt that that's where he belonged, amongst the flames with his brothers. The whiz never asked him about anything, just told him he was a liar. My buddy nodded politely and left the session early. My buddy's next stop was to the battalion armory, where he withdrew his personally owned pistol, an old 1911 chambered in a .38 Super Auto. His grandfather carried it as a policeman back in Kentucky. He didn't even leave the armory. He went to a weapon cleaning table, unlatched the gun box, pulled the ancient pistol out, gave it a good rigorous cleaning, making sure it had been clean as the day it rolled off the factory floor, loaded a magazine with one round, chambered it, placed the muzzle under his chin, and went to be with his fallen brothers. So when good old Doc said he saw someone out in the desert at night, there nobody in the right frame of heckin' mind should be, I felt a pang in my chest. Here it comes, I mentally whimpered, just knowing that there is some weird crap out there. But aloud, all I said was, "What are they doing?" "Looks like they're watching us," Doc said. "Could be someone from 1-3 looking out for us. Getting lost in the desert at night sounds like something that someone from 1-3 might be getting up to. Oh crap, what if it's a lost road guard?" "Bloody doubt that crap," I said under my breath, but knowing that the possibility was always there at 2-9. Lost road guards were a common thing. Road guards get posted in the area to keep people from moving into a training area. Training ends and their company or battalion packs it up and heads home for the day. Somebody forgets about the road guards. They end up getting left in the desert for a few days. Sometimes they die. Sometimes they live. Sometimes they wander off into the desert and get lost forever. So all I said to Doc was, "Keep your eyes on them. I'll go let Dingo know." I woke Dingo up and told him what we might have on our hands. He nodded sleepily, but got up and was starting to wake his crew up. "Handle it, mate," he said to me, pulling a 20-ounce Red Bull out of his day pack. Meaning, go check it out. We'll try and get range control on the radio, and we'll move up to you. Then we'll see what it's about from there. I walked back to Doc, who was still staring out into the desert towards Amboy through his NVG. Still got him? I asked. Yeah, Doc said without looking away from it. Let's boogie. It was a woman. Looked like she was a typical small-town desert local. A heckin' yokel. Her age was indiscriminate, but not in an ageless beauty sort of way. More like she'd been force-marched down a lot of miles of bad road and tripped over a few rocks along the way. Rocks made out of meth at that. She stood stock still as we approached. When we got close, her face split into a wide grin. Had about as many teeth as a jack-o'-lantern. That broke-tooth smile sent a shiver down my spine. Something about it was malicious, but I couldn't put my thumb on it. I hit her with a flashlight and realized she was filthy. Like she'd been stumbling through the desert for a week. She was barefoot in nothing but grandma's panties and an oversized t-shirt advertising a bar I'd never heard of in some crap-hole town I'd never heard of either. Her arms and legs were torn up, with scratches and old scabs. The t-shirt for the bar was stained with something I'd pegged as old blood, like an old football jersey after a rough game. Her hands were covered in the same. Filthy with all manner of God knows what the hell that is. Ma'am? Doc, God bless him, called out to her. I don't think he was even capable of having the reservations I had. We're here to help. You're gonna be all right. Are you injured? Injured? The woman said back. Her voice had a strange quality to it. It almost sounded like more than one person was trying to speak through her voice box, which was stuffed full of gravel. I remember noticing that something about her eyes wasn't quite cutting the mustard either. Something looked strange about them. Can I be injured? A beating? A cutting? Yes. Many things plague this flesh. Doc looked over at me. I could see the whites of his eyes, wide in shock as they were. I didn't need NVGs to know that a look of behecklement was etched across that otherwise friendly face. I shrugged back at him. Shock, he mouthed at me, as if the word would explain everything about her situation. I sincerely doubted that was her issue. But there wasn't a way that I could put it to Doc that would have made sense. I took another step forward. Doc mirrored me. He may have been weirded out, but he was a naval corpsman. His sort were naturally inclined to get involved, especially when somebody needed them. My steps were short, more cautious than anything. The hairs on the back of my neck were standing at attention. Not quite liking the feeling of this whole situation. The woman watched us approach. Her not quite right eyes drilled through us. She reminded me of a spider waiting in ambush. All right, ma'am, Doc said. We'll get you some help. I'm a U.S. Navy hospital corpsman, and I can help you. Help? The woman asked. You have what we need. I paused in my tracks. That use of the royal we was disconcerting. What we was she talking about? About 400 meters behind us, I heard the Ave roar to life. The sudden noise and the dead quiet made me jump. Made Doc jump too. We both turned to look behind us. The platoon was getting moving. There'd be a few more minutes, the drivers having to pick their way down the mountain so they could come pick us up, in case someone needed an evac. Haste may have been advisable, but accidentally rolling a tractor over could have slowed the process of medvac to a stop. We looked at each other and nodded. The boys were coming, and we would have some backup. We turned to look at the woman, who was now suddenly less than 3 feet away from Doc. He jumped again as he turned and came nose to nose with her. She hadn't made a sound when she crossed 15 or 20 feet in the blink of an eye. "Yes," the woman said. I saw Doc take a step back, his face screwed up. As I imagined, he got an ungodly whiff of whatever was on her breath. "You have what we need." "What the hell?" I said out loud, shifting my rifle to the front and bringing it up slightly. My finger curled around the trigger. Something in me screamed for me to Mozambique this tramp and be done with it. I wish I paid it some heed. Consequences be damned. The woman's head turned my way, her not quite right eyes boring into mine. She smiled, like a Bengal tiger smiles at a dude wandering lost in the Sunderbans, I imagined. She looked down at my rifle and then back up at my face. There was something wordless in her smile, something saying, "Go ahead, let's see if that works for you." This woman couldn't have been more than 5'6", running at about 160 pounds. By all rights, should have been a walkover, should she want to test her physical mettle against mine. But something told me I was staring at dangerous threat personified. "Doc," I said, throwing as much warning into my voice as possible. "We need to get away from this thing." "Yeah," was all he said as he took another step back. The woman's head shifted back to Doc. I was happy that malevolent gaze was off of me, but I felt bad for Doc, who had hit with both barrels from point blank. "No, stay with us," was all she said. Her arm shot out, grabbing him by the collar of his uniform. Grubby broken nails digging into the collar of his Marpat uniform. I saw Doc's body rock from the impact. I closed the gap as quickly as I could. Scared or not, nobody rocks Doc's crap when I'm around. I planted my back foot against the other, intending to Spartan kick this desert psycho right in the jaw. I remember staring at the side of her head, as that was going to be my target. I pushed off the back foot and sent my size 12 combat boot her way. In a normal situation, I would have drilled her, breaking her jaw. She would have dropped Doc, and we would have gotten clear of her. But as it were, as with most of these stories, this was anything but a normal situation. I was moving with as much speed and ferocity as I could muster, but that meant nothing to this woman. To try and rationalize this even now, I'm at a loss. It looked like she was moving outside of time almost, and that's the best way I can put it. She leisurely put up her hand and caught the heel of my boot. It instantly lost all of momentum, as if I had just donkey-kicked a dumpster. She didn't even budge, like the difference in weight and force just didn't apply to her. I was suddenly off balance and wobbling side to side, trying to maintain my footing. The woman looked up at me with that terrifying jack-o'-lantern grin. "It's not your day, sweetie," she said before shoving me back. I didn't fall gracefully. I didn't even register it in my mind that I should be at least attempting to break a fall. I landed on my back at about 20 feet away from where I'd been standing. I let out a wheezing grunt as the air was knocked out of my lungs by the impact. I lay there for a moment, trying to register what had just happened, and just plain old trying to catch my breath. I looked over at Doc and the woman. She was holding him by the front of his blouse. She lifted him from the ground. Doc may have been a pacifist, but he got the idea he wasn't in a position to not fight back. His booted feet kicked at her, but he just couldn't seem to nail her in a good place. He balled up his fists and sent a wild haymaker at her. I know he made contact with the side of her head, but it didn't seem to bother her. I pushed myself to my feet, still trying to pull air into my lungs. I staggered forward on unsteady feet and managed to close the distance between Doc whilst he fought for his life. I brought my M4 up, reared back, and shoved the rifle forward, intending to muzzle thump her in the ribs, because for some reason that seemed like a good idea at the time. Without looking, her free hand shot out and grabbed my rifle by the barrel, stopping my clumsy charge dead in my tracks. I reacted on muscle memory alone. My thumb clicked the sensor off of safe and onto fire. I popped off 2 rounds before she pulled the rifle from my grip. She jammed the rifle backwards, the buttstock catching me in the chest, knocking the breath out of me again. I fell flat on my ass again. My lungs burned for air. My ears were ringing from the rifle fire. She turned and hurled the weapon off into the desert somewhere. End over end, the rifle sailed off into the night sky, out into the darkness. She smiled down at me. Her not quite right eyes were packed with malicious glee. She threw her head back and laughed. I noticed that there was blood trickling down her arm. At least one of my shots had actually hit her. The shoulder of her t-shirt was soaked in blood. It didn't seem to matter to her. She smiled at me again and shook her head, like one would at the antics of a particularly stupid raccoon. She turned her gaze back to Doc, who was still struggling at the end of her outstretched arm. Doc never quit. He was still kicking, still swinging. My friend fought all the best he could. Like the gunshot shoulder, it just didn't seem to matter to the woman. Her jaw dropped open. Her rotten teeth were on full display. I noticed that her eyes rolled into the back of her head till just the whites were showing, like a shark when it goes in for the kill. She made a sound deep in her throat, quietly dry heaving like she was trying to make herself puke. She sat like that for a moment, Doc struggling out on the end of her arm, her jaw hanging open. Then the grossest damn thing I'd ever seen happened. Something white poked past her teeth. It should have been hard to see, with nothing but moonlight to aid the eye, but the thing was a shade of bone white that seemed to damn near glow in the dark. It was a little bulbous thing, and as it crawled out of her mouth and down her cheek, I groaned out loud as revulsion washed over me. It hopped onto her shoulder and began poking its way up her arm, toward Doc's face. I realized it was some sort of oversized maggot, about the size of a 50 cal round. It was headed for Doc. Doc saw it coming too. Both of his eyes went wide as he watched it march up the woman's extended arm towards him. Somehow, we both knew it was heading for his mouth. He clamped his mouth shut as hard as he could. He tried to slap at the maggot, but like the woman, the bug wasn't too worried about Doc's efforts at self-defense. As it got closer, I could hear muffled screaming as Doc did his best to keep his mouth closed. He was terrified. I was too. The woman reached out with her free hand, her fingers lightly caressing Doc's face. He tried to jerk his head away from the woman's dirty hand, but it didn't work. He just couldn't shake her. Doc's mouth opened. I didn't know if it was to scream or tell the woman to screw off. I prefer to think it was the latter, but it didn't matter. He never got the chance. The huge maggot at this point was on the woman's hand, or was before it jumped into Doc's mouth. It wriggled past his lips and back behind his teeth. Doc's eyes went wide. He made choking sounds as the thing slithered down his gullet. The woman ran her free hand across his temple, like a mother trying to comfort her child. Doc looked back down at her, his eyes wide with terror. She merely smiled back up at him again, before her jaw fell back open. More maggot heads poked past her lips. If I thought one was bad, the torrent of maggots spilling from her lips was worse. They followed in their fellow bug's footprints, out of her mouth, inching across her face, down her neck, across her shoulder. They quickly covered her arm in wriggling mass of disgusting ugly. They followed the path up her arm toward Doc's face. Doc's eyes were still wide open, still terrified, but that thing was inside of him, and it must have did something to him, because he relaxed in her grip, like all the fight was drained out of him. His mouth fell open as well, as if he was welcoming the maggots into him. I figured I had to do something, so I pushed myself to my feet. I noticed I was still rasping a little as I staggered forward. By this point, her arm was completely covered in maggots. They're almost to Doc's face. I reached down deep and grabbed a hold of whatever fight I still had left in me, what hadn't been battered out of me at that point. I took a few loping, jittery steps and did my best to barrel into the woman, hoping to knock her over and interrupt the maggot transfer. I threw myself forward, trying to truck her ass. It was just like hitting a fence post, dug 20 feet into solid concrete. My mass hitting hers had zero effect. I fell to the ground at the woman's feet, just as the maggot parade marched into Doc's mouth. My bell was severely rung, and the woman didn't even react. Didn't even acknowledge my existence. I tasted blood in my mouth and wasn't sure where it had come from. Holy crap, I managed to gasp out as pain dug its nails into me. Doc started to convulse. I desperately hoped for the cavalry to hurry up and arrive because I clearly wasn't cutting the mustard. I could hear the sound of a roaring AAV in the distance. I could tell from the tone of the engine that it wasn't coming quickly, probably plodding along with a ground guide out in front of it for safety's sake. Whereas me and Doc had just walked down the side of the hill, the track would have to take the tank trail, especially out here with old trenches and fighting holes everywhere. Dingo was probably playing it safe with the tractor. He probably felt that whatever the situation was, I would have it in hand. He would have thought the earlier rifle fire would have lit a fire under their butts. But no. I looked up at Doc as the last of the maggots wriggled past his lips. His eyelids dropped closed. His body stopped shaking. Frothy drool spilled from the edges of his mouth. Something big was happening to him. I remember praying that he wasn't dead. I regret that prayer now. Doc's eyes popped back open. His face was blank for a moment, before his features slid into a smile that was similar to the woman's. Malicious as all hell, with a certain sort of dangerous evil dancing behind his eyes. A look that had never once in his 23 years on this earth ever graced his features. His eyes weren't quite right. She grinned up at him. He closed his eyes as nodded back down at her, with a small, tight-lipped smile of his own on his face. She lowered him to his feet. Whatever had happened seemed to be done. I remember looking up at him. The way he stood, the way his face looked, the way his right hand jittered with a nervous energy. That ain't Doc, I remember thinking. They both looked down at me in unison, as if joined in thought.
"This one?"
the woman asked out loud.
"Not this one,"
Doc said. His voice was the same, yet somehow different, like someone else was working his voice box.
"This one's end?"
The woman spoke again. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up at that cryptic bullcrap. There were only so many things a sentence like that could mean. Doc stared down at me for a moment. I saw something flash across his eyes. A moment of softness. Maybe it was Doc still rattling around in there, exerting some influence. Maybe the thing in Doc just didn't think I was the right size of meat suit. I don't know.
No.
Doc finally said.
Amusement this one might make yet.
The woman's eyes got wide. She threw back her head and laughed. Doc laughed with her. Harsh barks of laughter. Big old guffaws like Doc had told the ultimate giggler. I looked from one to the other. I was sporting a big old ball of anxiety in my chest and was wondering just how concerned I should be about all of this laughing. What with an open and frank discussion of my end going on. I could hear the awe of gaining ground on us. I would have turned my head to look, but honestly, I didn't want to take my eyes off of the thing standing over me. Doc and the woman both looked at each other, into each other's eyes. Both nodded at each other as one, something unspoken passing between them. With that unsaid, unknowing something, they turned on their heels and ran off into the desert, moving a lot quicker than either of them physically should have been able to. The night quickly shrouded them from view. I watched after them, the direction they went, until they were out of sight. I didn't know what had just happened. I didn't know. But I felt like I had just lost my friend. Like I should be mourning. Doc was dead. It was just a different kind of dead. I didn't move. I sat right there on my butt trying to figure out what had just happened. I realized I was shaking, and it had nothing to do with the chilly night air. It was only a moment before the ground guide from the OV coming out to pick us up reached me, dragging the giant troop hauler along behind him. I sat there, ignoring the Marine asking me if I was okay, asking where Doc was. I didn't even look up at him. Couldn't admit that I had just let my friend down. I stared up into the headlights of the OV. I remember them seeming to look like an angry god's eyes glaring down at me like I had failed. And to be fair, I had. I hadn't been able to save Doc.